Okay, this seems to be working. So, welcome and good evening, all. And tonight, I want to speak about Miriam. She appears to make some small cameo appearances right through the Chumash until her final day, which is in this week's Parsha. But as we delve into her life, we discovered that she had an oversized influence on the Jewish people as a whole, and in particular on the leadership of the Jewish people, namely her two brothers, Aaron and Moshe. And this is based on a comment from the Ralbag, who explains this to us. Let's see if I can find this. No, I cannot find it because it's not yet open. So bear with me. It'll take a sec. Here we are. Here we are. Tribute to Miriam. Open it up. I'm sorry about this. And hopefully here it is. Miriam, who, as I said, had this oversized influence on the Jewish nation and on her siblings, whom she kind of co-led the Jewish people with. These are the words. I think we need to mute everyone. These are the words in the Parsha that describe her death. It's the desert of Tzir. It says in the first month, that will be the month of Tishrei. It doesn't say which date, and I didn't look it up. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but it's in the first month. People are there in Kadesh, which is in Midbatzin, and Miriam died there, and she was buried there. And immediately, the next verse tells us that there was a problem. And the problem was that there was no water. There was no water because it now seems that all the time, and we know this because we refer to the well that accompanied the Jewish people in the desert as the well of Miriam. It now turns out that that rock that Moshe had hit 38 years earlier, that rock stopped giving water, and there was no water. And of course, the people were most anxious about this. But the reaction is a throwback to 40 years ago, to 38 years earlier, when the people kind of quarreled against Moshe. They get really upset. If only we died, would our brothers would perish before God. So there's been this 38 years since the spies. Every year, large groups of people have died. These are the survivors. These are the ones who had to go into the Holy Land together with with Moshe and Aaron at this point, at this stage. But they're getting really, really, really upset. And we discover at this point that, in fact, the water they had all along was there in the merit of Miriam. And with her demise and with the passing on, there is no more water. And they're really, really, really upset about this and complain. But the language here is kind of a throwback. These are people who were miraculously taken care of during the entire 40-year period in the desert, who were given manna from heaven, who were given clouds of glory to look after them, protect them from the elements, look after their clothing. And now the water's disappeared, and it seems like they're snapping. And they're going right back into that mode of the early years, where every time there was a threat, but it's a bit different, because back then, They were being taken out into the unknown, and they had no idea of how to be sustained. But Moshe has proven his track record with having taken care of them for all this time. But with Miriam's going, they snapped, they would revert back into that mode of a generation earlier, and they start to murmur and to get upset very, very badly. So we discover that right through the desert, Miriam had the merit of providing them with liquid, whereas it was, we're told, the merit of Moshe that gave them manna, and the merit of Aaron who gave them the clouds of glory. And in fact, a little bit further, in the same parasha, we'll record the death of Aaron, and the clouds of glory will go away. And at the beginning of the book of Joshua, Moshe will have left them, and the manna from heaven will have ceased as well. But let's go back to the beginning, because we're starting Miriam's life from the very, very, very end. And this is how we introduced to Miriam without her name the very first time. It's right in the second chapter of the book of Shmot, when Pharaoh calls over the Jewish midwives. This is some artistic rendition of the midwives in Egypt. And so if you can read the small script in Hebrew, there's lots of interesting motifs. This is a painting by Rachel Holtzkenner, I think is the name. Not my kind of art, but it's quite interesting. Pharaoh calls over the midwives. They're named here Shifra and Pua, but Rashi tells us right away those are, based on the Talmud in Sota, those are Yocheved and Miriam, mother and daughter. And he gives them the instruction, and it seems that Shifra and Pua are not their real names. Shifra and Pua are names that denote the profession, the fact that they gave birth and delivered healthy babies and took care of them and swaddled them and calmed them down once they were born. And the instruction is, you've got to kill the babies if they're boys at birth. And that's the first time we get introduced to Miriam, and we discover what she's made of, because of course she refuses, and she and her mother don't do what the king of Egypt did, fearing Hashem, but not fearing Pharaoh. And they get away with it, because when Pharaoh calls them in, he says, well, what is the story? And they said, no, not like you think. The Jewish women, they can give birth to themselves. They don't need midwives, and the plan is not working. But the point is, Miriam stood up for what she believed is right. And that's the very first exposure we have to Miriam, even if it's not mentioned explicitly by name. And that's where Miriam kind of, as a young woman already, is standing up to, because she's not that much older than Moshe. Moshe wasn't yet born at that point. So she's probably also the youngest midwife recorded in history. But we find out that Miriam was actually a prophetess very early on. This is based on the verse that we're going to come back to later, where it talks about, this is after the splitting of the sea, where Miriam takes the tambourine and goes out and dances with the other women, which is referred to here as Miriam Haneviyah Achot Aaron, Miriam the prophet or the prophetess, Aaron's sister. Now it should be the sister of Aaron and Moshe. Why is she referred to as Aaron's sister? So the Talmud deduces from here that she was already involved in prophecy when she was only Aaron's sister and before Moshe was even born. And that takes us back to this point in Jewish history, when a member of the house of Levi took as his wife a woman of Levi, and that is Yocheved, mother of Miriam, and her father Amram. And what had happened was that after the decree that all babies must be, once the Miriam plan had failed, Miriam Yocheved plan, the midwives killing the children, that had failed, Pharaoh ordered that all boys be thrown into the Nile. And at that point, Amram, who was the leader of the Jewish people at the time, Amram decides that it's not worth bringing babies into the world, and separates from his wife. And of course, the entire Jewish nation follows suit since he's the leader. And Miriam exercising her powers of prophecy at that point. Aaron's born, Moshe is not. So she's the sister of Aaron, prophetess. She convinces her father that's a wrong approach, that that's going to be the end of the Jewish people as a whole, that her words were, "You decrees worse than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh only decreed males. You've done males and females. Pharaoh's only, able to destroy the bodies, but you're not even letting souls come into the world." And she kind of convinces her father and mother to reunite. And this is the remarriage of the two of them, of Amram and Yocheved. Where it says the son of Levi and the daughter of Levi marry one another, and yes, they have a child, and that's the one we're going to know as Moshe ultimately. And it says that she saw Kitovhu. She saw he was beautiful. Talmud says the entire house filled with light when Moshe was born. He emanated a spiritual radiance that was simply out of this world. And when he was born, the Talmud records how Amram, her father, actually kissed Yocheved on the head and said, "Blessed be you, look what blessing you brought into the world." That only lasted for a couple of months, because as we know, shortly thereafter is Moshe being floated down the river in a basket. And there is, Miriam standing on the side and watching. So going back to the text, 3 months go past, she can no longer hide him, and then she gets the basket, and the child is put into the reeds by the bank of the Nile. At that point, the Talmud says, Amram taps Miriam on the head and says, "Hey, and what about your prophecy? What's going to happen now?" And that's why if you look at the actual words in the Torah, it doesn't say Miriam went to stand there in order to find out what the outcome would be. Ma Yaselo, more correctly translated, would be how this was going to pan out. In her mind, her prophecy was correct, and this was going to be a great leader of the Jewish people, but it didn't look like it was going to happen. And this is why Miriam is hanging around, and she's waiting there to find out how this is going to actually turn out. Unbelievable faith that Miriam is displaying all along, unbelievable courage and certainty in the prophecy and its outcome. Remarkable. We find Miriam again at the edge of the sea, and there she is leading the people in song and in dance with the tambourines. Now we often read about the fact that the Jewish people were redeemed from Mitzrayim in the merit of the righteous Jewish woman. And who stands at the helm, this group of righteous Jewish women? Well, you guessed it. It's Miriam. What are they doing with tambourines anyway? I mean, if they were rushed out of Egypt and the dough couldn't rise, why are they taking tambourines with them? If not that there was a certainty there was going to be miraculous events that were going to happen in the future, and they kind of had tambourines ready with them to celebrate the victory and the miracles. And so alongside the more famous song of Moshe, as Yashir Moshe Bnei Israel, the song of the sea, alongside that, parallel with that, is Miriam with the Jewish women, and they are there with dance and with song, and they're celebrating the exodus from Egypt and the great salvation of the splitting of the sea. Which is an unbelievable, again, mark of emunah, of faith, on behalf of Miriam, that she was able to imbue the Jewish woman with that belief of have your tambourines on hand because we're going out and we're going to be dancing. And whereas Moshe's song is simply sung, Miriam is involving the woman kind of, in a fully immersive experience, because they're dancing, they are playing instruments, they are, they are singing. I don't know if I have the words of the song here, I don't. But they sang words similar to the ones of Moshe's song in celebration. So again, that leadership comes out, and as well as the great faith and the belief and the prophecy. Miriam features again in the kind of unpleasant incident that we had in our last year. So I discussed with you the criticism of Moshe and the result of Miriam ending up being banished outside of the camp for a week. That's Hashem's ruling. That had her father spat in the face of Hashem, she would have been bearing a shame for 7 days, and therefore she will not be healed from her tzorat, from the skin condition, from the leprosy, or whatever it was that she got. She's out the camp for 7 days, and then she'll be readmitted, and she spends 7 days outside. While I'm mentioning it, maybe this is not Miriam's shining moment. It says the people didn't travel until Miriam was healed, or Miriam was readmitted into the camp. Now, what's that all about? And where is this coming from? This is coming from a reward for the scene you saw earlier of Miriam waiting to see what would happen to Moshe, and now she's being paid back. But the fact that the entire nation is waiting for her and doesn't let her drag along outside while they're traveling, just gives us an idea of the respect that the nation had for her, not just because she was Moshe's brother, but because she was one who was really influential in the way she led the Jewish people for this entire period. Which takes us back to the final scene in Miriam's life, and this is actually the posthumous scene just after her death. Now, remember, Miriam dies, and immediately the Jewish people go into this rebellion mode, and there's no water. And Hashem's, of course, going to give them water. The instruction comes immediately. Hashem says to Moshe, take the staff, gather the people, and go and talk to the rock, and it'll give water. And you will then take the water out of the rock and give the water drink to the congregation and all of their livestock. And of course, we know what happens next. We know what happens next. But really what happens next is it's kind of tragic in that everything falls apart. Everything kind of, just goes to pieces. Yes, Moshe loses it, and he gets upset. And he talks down to the Jewish people and refers to them as rebels. Yes, Moshe then strikes the rock, and then things fall apart. And there's a decree that Moshe and Aaron will not take the Jewish people into the Holy Land. Now, maybe it was building up. It's already starting from issues that came up early on, but this is definitely the point at which Hashem says, you failed to sanctify me in the eyes of the Jewish people. You failed to, where's the lesson? Well, if you can talk to a rock and it listens, then for sure the Jewish people have to listen when instructions are given to them. But if he has to strike the rock to get water out, and what happened there is that he couldn't find the rock, and he spoke and it didn't work, and eventually, he struck the rock. But of course, we know that anger is able to kind of make errors in judgment and make mistakes. We all know, when we made decisions and we acted under the impulse of anger, we've regretted our decisions and our actions here. Moshe acts under that emotion, and that has disastrous consequences. And from then on, it's not the same anymore. They're not taking the Jews into the Holy Land, not Moshe and not Aaron. Hashem says so clearly, and it's it's very sad. And I want to share with you the comments of the Ralbag that I mentioned earlier on, and his take on what actually happened there, and why this is actually connected with the death of Miriam. Because yes, Moshe strikes the rock, and here's a decree, and Hashem says, after this event, sorry, no, I haven't got the text. You failed to sanctify me in the eyes of the Jewish people, and you will not be the ones who are going to bring the people into the Holy Land. Says the Ralbag, what does this have to do with the death of Miriam? Yes, the lack of water, but isn't there a deeper connection? And it says yes, in two ways. And this is how we get to the end of her life. We understand the impact of her leadership beyond just the fact that she was able to imbue, her fellow women with unbelievable faith and get them to drag tambourines, and was dynamic enough to make them dance, and had the courage of the convictions to stand up against the Pharaoh. It goes deeper than that. He says, and I quote, "The death of tzaddikim has an impact. Miriam was able to draw the hearts of the Jewish people with her wisdom. And, says the Ralbag, had she been alive, the Jewish people would not have reacted the way they did to the lack of water." Now, it's a bit of a catch-22, because had she been alive, maybe the water wouldn't have stopped. But the point is, she had a way of leading the Jewish people quietly, because you don't see her name in the lights all the time. You see Aaron, you see Moshe, you see Miriam appearing here and there, right through the story. But she had a way of having influence on the Jewish people. And her influence was calming. And with her wisdom, she would have been able to draw the people together and not allow that to degenerate into rebellion. Because really, I mean, we say Moshe struck the rock, and that's why he didn't go into the Holy Land. But it's not just because of that. It's because the Jewish people rebelled, and they gathered around them and got them upset, and this was the reaction. And the Ralbag seems to suggest that Miriam is the one who would have had the power, the dynamic leadership to be able to calm the Jewish people down, de-escalate it all. Because I made a comment earlier on, you'll recall that this is behavior that goes way back to 40 years earlier, when they got to Mara and the water was bitter, and when they got to this place and there was no water, and there was no food, and the various murmurings, rebellions that took place in the initial months of their exodus. But although there's very little known about what happened during the ensuing intermediate 38 years, except we know that the entire original generation passed on. We also know that this was a time when the Jewish people were imbued with faith, with the ability to look Hashem in the face and to see miracles and benefit from those miracles. And that's why it's called a Dor De'ah, or a generation of knowledge. At that point, this shouldn't have happened. And we discovered that Miriam is one of the, cogs in the wheel that hold the whole thing together. So there's little known about that period, but if there was an insignificant insurrection, it would have been there. And the fact that we know so little is because this seems to be a plateau of contentment and of acceptance, and of functionality within the Jewish people. But as we get to the gates of Canaan and about to now cross the Jordan River and conquer the kingdom of Sichon and Og, and eventually go into the Holy Land, the areas of Canaan, the 7 Canaanite nations. At that point, the wheels seem to be falling off. What happened? Well, the cog's missing. Says the Ralbag. Miriam, with her wisdom, was able to hold it all together. So we discover an unbelievable aspect of her leadership. The Ralbag takes it one further, and he says, point 2, had Miriam been alive, Moshe and Aaron would not have acted the way they did. Yes, they were pushed. Yes, there was all of the people, murmuring and gathering around them, and that was difficult. But Miriam was an unbelievable source of inspiration and of guidance to them in their leadership of the Jewish people. And his words were, I quote, had Miriam been alive, they would have consulted her, Moshe and Aaron, because they're unbelievable. She would be able to say she had unbelievable respect for her and for her opinions and for her views, and they would have sought her guidance in terms of how to deal with this crisis. So Miriam missing wasn't just holding together the Jewish people as a whole, it was also, the beginning of the falling apart of, I don't have to correct what is a triumvirate, but one of the three is a woman, but there must be a word for a trio, which includes two males and one female. Grammatically, cannot be a triumvirate because that means three men. If my Latin serves me right from way, way back. She was part of that threesome that led the Jewish people. As soon as her influence is lost, Moshe and Aaron are not dealing with it, perhaps, in the way that they should have. So here's a tribute to Miriam. And it is only at the very end when we realize what we're missing that we realize what we had all along. And perhaps that's my final point. Often, it's only when somebody is gone and we eulogize them and pay tribute to them, they realize the fullness of what we had. And it is only at the very, very end with this, I wouldn't say obscure Balbag, because I found it online within a few seconds. That heard it in some other shiur that I was listening to this morning, actually. But it's at her death, and when we see how things fall apart, we realize how much she was holding everything together all along. Thank you very much.